Hello, everyone. Welcome to the training, learning, and development community. Thanks for joining us today. And let's see, who do we have in? I see Eric is in so far. I'm sure more people will be rolling in as we go. Happy Friday to those of you that are going to be here in the live chat. Hello, Gina. Thanks for popping in. Very excited about this particular episode of the LMS playlist. We've got our guest, Tom McDowall. Tom, do you like to go by Tom or Thomas? I always forget.
I'll go by Tom. That's the easiest one, isn't it?
Right, Tom McDowall, who is a pretty recent member of TLDC, and already in just like the last month or two that I've gotten to sort of know him a little bit with his interactions on Slack and elsewhere. He knows his stuff. So I am really psyched about having him on today because this topic, the LMS, is such a huge conversation that we should be having within the L&D space. And I rarely hear it being discussed outside of like sponsored webinars and, vendors kind of promoting their LMS product. It's rare that I see like real talk about it. And so I'm totally excited about having this conversation with Tom. He has lots of experience with LMSs. He's technical. He's a media specialist. He's got all of these things to contribute. So we're going to talk about his experiences with LMS, how to choose an LMS, the considerations you need to have, and also just as an instructional designer, why you should be considering your design process and all of that when you're choosing an LMS. It just seems so vital. And I never hear that part of the discussion ever out there as well. So hope you enjoy this. Tom is from Evolve Learning Design. It's your own agency, right? Or your own.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Based out of the UK. And so, Tom, tell us just a little bit, for those of you that haven't watched his member showcase, your background into coming into L&D. What exactly, how did you become an instructional designer?
Yeah, sure. So I always describe myself as I started off as a frustrated people manager, frustrated at the quality or lack thereof, the quality of training that my people were getting. Having come in from a kind of IT and media production background prior to that, I kind of saw this, in the businesses I was working in anyway, this big gap between our use of technology for our customers, but not for our internal people. And so that led me down the road of becoming an ID. Interestingly, I think those same points are the reason why when a business I was at went, if we're going to go digital, we'll need an LMS. Suddenly it became my job. Because about computers. Apparently that was enough. So, which I think it kind of tags on to what you were saying right at the start there, is that it's not necessarily the most glamorous subject in the world. We don't talk about it enough. And I think the reason is, if we're honest, there's not a lot of glory in being the LMS guy, as I was branded for so long, or, whoever you are in the business, or the LMS team even, then they're not the ones necessarily going, we've produced a game, or we've caused a 60% uplift in compliance. They don't get to make those claims. On a really good day, the LMS admin gets to say, everything worked as expected, because that's the perfect day. And in that sense, I kind of compare it a bit to working in IT. No one cares about the IT department until something breaks. That's the truth of it, isn't it? Same as no one cares about what authoring tool you use until you turn around and say, Storyline or Captivate can't do that. It's a tool limitation. Suddenly it's a discussion about the tool rather than the experience.
Right.
And I think that's one thing I loved when I saw you were starting these episodes, and I kind of wanted to get involved in them, because that conversation has never been more important. And it's important that conversation doesn't just happen in boardrooms among the IT department and the finance department, which so often gets to decide which LMS a business gets. Right. And those people have valuable input. They absolutely do, but they should not be making the final decision on which LMS is the right LMS. It's ultimately a learning focused tool. Why on earth is that an IT and finance decision? You'd never ask the finance department to decide which font to use in your next piece of learning. You'd never ask them how to categorize information. You'd never ask them how to arrange a face-to-face training session. So why let them decide how all of your content is actually going to be accessed?
Right. That's nice. You know, I really believe that if you can articulate some of these real issues about how the LMS is considered within an organization, if you're an instructional designer, I think that'll get you ahead of the game. If you have some working knowledge of the LMS and just the importance of it within the structure of your org, you know, that is super important. So any beginning instructional designers out there, just really take heed to this playlist, even to the last conversation that I had with Quetzal. He had the same kind of take on it. And I'll tell you, you know, like when I was booking really, really large conferences, and, you know, we were looking for what vendors are we going to come in and spend the most money, the number one spot was always the LMS vendors, because they make so much money. But at the same time, the emphasis within our own industry is never like focused on how important the LMS is. It's just on other stuff. So this is a great series. And Tom, I'm going to go ahead and just let you take it away, and I'll jump in with any questions. Folks, if you have any questions that you want to ask, post them in chat or add them to the Ask a Question section, and I'll hit up Tom in different breaks and stuff.
Awesome. I did just notice Julia posted in there about being in IT and just a good day is when they forget that you exist. I recognize that. I feel that quite often. You know, when you come in and there's nothing in the inbox, that is a good day about to happen right there. So yeah, I thought a really a good place to start actually would be where I was planning to finish, but we kind of kicked off on the subject already about why should we, whether we're instructional designers, learning experience designers, be really interested in the LMS. It kind of feels like it lives in a supporting role. But actually, regardless of whether you design or develop, what authoring tool you use, the approach you use, the modality of delivery, everything is going to be hosted on this platform. It's actually the single most consistent bit of everyone's learning experience inside a business, or if you're in an educational institution, it's the same thing. And that consistency is really key, because the question is it consistently easy to get through? Is it almost you forget you're accessing it through a platform because it's just that slick? Or every time someone says go to the LMS or the name of your LMS, does everyone pull a bit of a face because they know it's going to take them 32 clicks and half an hour of loading to get to where they want to be? It's such an important consideration when we're designing content, because every single bit of content we design is going to be seen through the lens of that LMS user. And I will use the term kind of LMS pretty freely through this, but this applies to whatever platform you are using, whether it's an LMS, an LXP, an LXR. We've got about six. It's a bit like the instructional designer job title debate. There are about 60 different names now for the platform on which you host your learning. There obviously are some differences, but I'll use LMS throughout kind of this conversation. And for me, that is the biggest piece. You wouldn't hand over any other part of your learning experience design to anyone else. It's what we're really great at. It's what we pride ourselves on. So why give away the first impressions, the how to access your course, whether or not someone's going to be able to move through related content easily and quickly, which ideally is what we want. We want users to not just go to our content when they've been told by their manager, do the content or else. We want them to maybe go for that go for that reason the first time round, but then see something else. Really enjoy the platform, see value in returning off their own back. And that will only happen if that LMS is the right one for your business, your people. And there are a lot of considerations in that. Kind of linking back to where I started with LMSs, the biggest considerations and kind of hurdles in many businesses do sit within the worlds of finance and IT, because those are the real departments you're going to have to work with when dealing with an LMS. In an ideal world, would you just be able to do whatever you want? Maybe, maybe not. Certainly from an IT perspective, definitely not. The biggest thing I found that I had to deal with bringing in LMS was the idea of a closed architecture network. So for us, it was, we are a Microsoft and SAP house. Those are the systems we use. And from an IT and networking perspective, that's brilliant because you have total control. Everything's closed down. No data is going to weird places or doing odd things. And actually the load on your network is relatively minimal because those are really highly optimized platforms. This is coming back around to an LMS related point soon, I promise. When you bring in a new platform to that, that is a big challenge to the business. From an IT, it sounds very, very simple. Oh, we're gonna set up this platform. It's going to be hosted externally. It's going to have this data on it, and people will just be able to log into it from wherever they want. It's just like a website. Well, it is and it isn't, because this is the big mistake I made. I kind of made that argument, which is what I was told by the said LMS provider. And then only much later did I figure out that actually the challenge to the IT team is huge to implement a new LMS or a new platform. To have data, so the names of employees, email addresses, what courses they've done, maybe what department they work in, possibly contact information if you're including like a social media aspect in your platform. That data is safeguarded in the UK. It's GDPR now. Before that was the Data Protection Act. I'm going to go ahead and say you definitely have an equivalent over in the States. So big hurdle for me as an ID trying to bring in LMS was when they turned around and said, okay, so you're going to need to do what over here is called a DAPRA. What this is in practice is like a 300-page data protection and cybersecurity document, which as an instructional designer was not something I'd ever planned to look at in my lifetime, and hope I never have to again, to be honest. This, when I talk about hurdles to bringing in an LMS, this is the big one. And I think this is the one where LMS integrators don't get enough credit. Data is incredibly difficult to deal with on that scale. IT is going to be very nervous. The business is going to be very nervous the moment you start saying external servers. It sounds simple enough, but question one, where are they? Where is that data actually going? It's something I'd never considered till they asked. And they went, because if it's in the EU, it's fine. If it's not, it's a breach. It's those simple things where, we might not consider it to be complex, but it is. And these are all things that, had I known them ahead of time, I could have considered when choosing which LMS to push for in the business. Which is kind of the big topic at the head of this, really, is as an instructional designer, if you're lucky enough within your business or push the point enough, and I would stress that is do push the point if you get the opportunity to be involved in bringing in an LMS or replacing an LMS, there are some really key things to do ahead of time and consider when choosing your LMS. The first one for me is find a friend in IT. Find someone in the IT team that you can build a relationship with, and you can involve them in this project from day one, so that whilst you're looking at user experience, the platform, the reporting, the real learning focused stuff, the us stuff, you also know you've got a genuine expert on your business's IT infrastructure looking at it, because you might find the perfect platform from your perspective, only to have it suddenly jump on you in a meeting in front of stakeholders and all sorts that there is absolutely no way this can be implemented. So get them involved really, really early.
Tom, I'm going to jump in real quick because I'm just like laughing in the background here. When I was doing research on this topic, I found so many articles on top 5 things you need to do to launch your LMS, and there's just literally hundreds of articles like that, but none of them ever talk about that piece, about the IT piece.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, do you have an IT background at all?
Yeah. So when I left college and realized that my lovely creative lifestyle was not going to fly in the real world, and I needed to get like a job that involved a paycheck at the end of the month and those kinds of silly things, I went into IT and looked at sort of network infrastructure and things like that. Right. And yet still, when I found myself in the role, didn't even cross my mind to go to IT first, because you're exactly right. All the advice is learning focused. It's about compliance with SCORM and XAPI, links to LRSs, which are all great. They're all awesome things to look for, but none of them are going to matter if the IT department turns around and says, nope. That you're unlikely to persuade your IT department to change their network infrastructure for your LMS. Right. They might do. They might be truly lovely people that hate their home life and want to invest thousands of man hours in an overturn. But it's unlikely.
Yeah, and I'm really curious, like Q or Eric or even Julia, anybody out there, how much do you, if you're an LMS admin, how much do you currently interact with IT as an LMS admin? It seems like that. I don't know. Is that a regular occurrence for you, Tom, that if you were adminning an LMS, that you have to be in constant sort of collaboration with IT?
Oh, yes. So interesting story on that front. You messaged me the other day about this session, and I was up at gone 1 a.m. Yeah. Guess what I was dealing with? I had a client overseas with 60 people in to start their new induction and an LMS that wouldn't load. It would load fine for me here in the UK, but not for them over in India. And so off we went. That was a long call to IT. But having that prior relationship made that super easy. It took a long time to fix and figure it all out, but there was no issue with the LMS. That's the thing, is that a lot of LMS or platform issues are actually network issues, but it's not as simple as there's no internet connection, which is what people tend to assume when you say network issue. So for them, we had a weird combination of firewall related stuff that wasn't blocking the site, but was blocking the content. And, without going into loads of detail, I think we've got some IT folks in the chat, which is great.
Been there, done there. You know how that goes. So if you have, like, say you're making you're part of the purchasing or decision-making process of an LMS and you're an instructional designer, how much should you focus on the technical part? Like, the input of, if you're an instructional designer and you're helping make the decision to purchase an LMS, how comfortable do you need to be with that IT function, with the technical parts of it?
I think that you don't need to become an IT technician. You absolutely don't. You don't need to understand everything. You do need to be able to have these conversations, though. And I don't think that requires, an education or a background in it, not necessarily even any practical ability. More than anything, it requires the willingness to say, hold on a minute, I don't understand what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Because even with the background, when we came round to actually implementing something of this scale, I was in meetings where I was saying, whoa, hold on, I don't understand what those words mean in that particular sentence structure. That's not English. Of course it was, but it was just, some of it is incredibly specific. So I think there are very few instructional designers, I'm certainly not amongst them, that would have the complete IT background knowledge required to implement an LMS, nor do we need it. It's not our skill set, right? But that's why I think having that relationship early on is important, because you can start building up the key awareness so that you can ask questions of your LMS vendor. Because realistically, are you going to take the IT team with you to the next Learning Technology Summit? Probably not. They're busy. But that way, when someone's selling you the dream, you can A, not get lied to, and B, ask them the more practical questions, which historically they've been very bad at answering, I'll be honest. There are a couple of companies that really know their stuff, but there are lots of others, as I'm sure we've all experienced, that kind of promise you the world's most perfect LMS, and sometimes we lack the knowledge to challenge them on some things that to an IT team might become very obviously problematic.
Nice. So key point is just partner with your IT team early in this process, because they're going to be absolutely critical in the whole system. All right.
Buy them cake, beers, biscuits, whatever you need to keep them on side, because that way, when at 1 a.m. you've got an LMS issue, they'll take your call. So yeah, I mean, moving beyond the IT topic. The other kind of key considerations really for your LMS are very similar to when you make considerations around designing your next piece of learning. when we're talking about learning experience, there is a consideration on how, knowing your audience. How are they going to be accessing it? Are your audience sat in an office on desktops? Are they in a call center? Are they going to be on mobile devices? Is responsiveness a really key issue for you and your platform? If it is for your content, then it is for your platform. There's a certain assumption often made that because a lot of LMSs are web-based, they will be responsive. It's not the case. And even some that claim to be responsive, some do it better than others, much like authoring tools. We all know the joy of someone going, well, storyline's kind of responsive. It scales is what they mean. Is it responsive? No, not at all. Or at least not in any real sense. And so those sort of considerations are really key. How are your users going to be logging in? Are you looking at a really nice, smooth single sign-on process? If not, how are you going to make, or how is the LMS going to make logging in as easy as possible? Because I'm not sure about you. When I'm at work or when I worked in businesses, I would have 5 or 6 different passwords and login credentials details. Am I realistically going to remember my LMS details as well as all of them? Perhaps not. They're certainly the ones I'm going to remember less often. So real simple user experience stuff. We often jump straight to the cool learning related stuff that we all get very excited about. But thinking about that learner first is so key. Their journey to the LMS, their journey through the LMS. What do you want your LMS to be? Which sounds like a really bizarre question, but there are so many different approaches. A really popular one over the last few years has been the Netflix of learning, which I always enjoy hearing. And then you see what that actually means on the page, and it's maybe not quite what they wanted. That usually means they chose an LMS first and then tried to turn it into the Netflix of learning. A great example of this is Moodle. So Moodle, I'm sure everyone has been to a Moodle platform at some point in their life. If not, you are missing out on a treat. Moodle being open source is very, very popular. And being open source, you can make it do a lot of things rather than just running it out of the box, which again is great, but it does not lend itself to really anything perfectly. There's always some kind of it's good enough. You have to make those considerations when using an open source platform. So if you want something specific, especially around look and feel, figure that out early. Go to them effectively with a storyboard, just like we would if we were designing learning content. So when you're speaking to LMS vendors and looking for a new platform, you know what you're looking for. When they show you examples of implementations, you can ask to see examples that are what you want to see or what your learners want to see. Consider as well the content you're going to put on the platform. So are you producing loads of high resolution video content? If you are, that is a really key consideration. It's also a consideration on the IT point before how many work networks can support, 4K video streaming to 120 users at the same time, as well as keeping core systems running. But also how many LMS platforms actually support the kind of content that you're looking to run. There's this assumption that if it's a modern LMS, it will run anything. It's really not the case. So those kind of almost like a storyboard for what it looks like and what the journey is, and then a key list of requirements in terms of your content. Is it video? Content in such as SCORM. So SCORM is kind of the default we look for. SCORM is dying. Support for SCORM has ended. We should really now be thinking about, does it support XAPI publication? If it doesn't, then we're stuck on a legacy reporting standard. Are they going to update that? Maybe, but what if they don't? Why would you leave yourself stuck in legacy when right now you've got the opportunity to bring something in that is set for at least the next 5 to 6 years until we find the next reporting standard? Again, Moodle is a great example where Moodle have been quite clear that they don't really feel any rush to sort out reporting through XAPI, which is fine. It's an open source platform. I probably wouldn't be rushed if I wasn't making any money off it, but that does leave it somewhat limited. So in terms of reporting, for now, businesses might be happy with the digital equivalent of bums in seat count and a smile sheet at the end, but in future they won't be. So really considering your content, the reporting you want at the back end of it early on, so you know what you're looking for. Beyond that, the biggest thing in terms of considerations of the platform itself is when you're having meetings with vendors, ask yourself who you're dealing with. I think we often kind of think, oh, they're part of the learning world. In my experience, they're not. They're really, really, really good salespeople, which is exactly who I would send if I was trying to sell an LMS to someone. That's not a bad thing. That's their job, right? But that also means that getting hands-on with it is often far more useful than the sales pitch. And one company that actually I think gets this right is the company we dealt with in the UK is Omniplex, but they're the UK retailer of Docebo and Articulate Storyline. And what we found was Omniplex they came in and did the sales pitch. We actually quite liked the Docebo platform for the company we were working with at the time, so we got a trial of the platform. And that's really key, because what that allowed us to do was to try and set it up as we wanted to. And very few providers don't offer some kind of free platform test, whether it's 14 days, 30 days, 60 days, they all offer something. So that gave us the opportunity to effectively create a fake LMS. That's a really interesting point there from Eric, actually, that I just saw come through about when your LMS says it supports XAPI, look whether it supports XAPI statements. I think that is a really, really good point. I've yet to find a good all-round LMS that does support full statements, and so you usually end up tacking on an external LRS that then feeds back in to your LMS as additional reporting, which is not an ideal solution, but I did forget to mention it, so that's a really good shout, actually. So yeah, when you're at the table, really try and get that, get an example, and then when you find you can't build everything they promised, get them back in, because then quite often they'll send a different person in who is more an LMS person, possibly an e-learning person, who will come and sit with you and help you really learn the tool before you ever buy it. Because certainly my biggest fear would be that we fork over the kind of money that we're talking about with an LMS. I mean, it's not uncommon to be talking £25,000, £30,000 commitments here when we're talking LMS, even in medium-sized businesses. So we're talking serious money now. And certainly as an instructional designer, an LMS admin, I wouldn't want it to be, oh yeah, buy it, and then we've made a mistake, because you can't exactly get a refund from many of these places. It's not really how it works. So get your hands on the product early, have a go at creating your desired end result, and then get the same company back in to tell you how to not necessarily fix it, but build what you wanted if you struggle to do it. Certainly, I've yet to find a platform that does everything you initially promised it will, or certainly does it well. Sometimes they'll, a bit like the XAPI argument, there'll be the argument of, well, it does do XAPI reporting, but not XAPI statements. Could they have been more upfront about that? Yes, absolutely. Is a salesperson ever going to paint you a 100% honest picture? Of course not. They'd be insane to. It's their job to sell. As nice as that world would be.
Hey, Tom, is it okay? I'm going to interrupt you because I sort of want to riff on that a little bit. And because that isn't something that we've quite covered yet. And it feels like it's something we can expand on. But what are some of the myths that LMS vendors might tell you that their systems are capable of, and they're actually not? Because what I'm hearing so far is the responsive discussion, right? So whether or not your actual LMS is, a responsive piece of digital equipment, and then also the, using the XAPI statements. That's new to me. I think that's really, really interesting to hear that. But are there any other things that like LMS is like potentially say that they do that actually maybe might not, or are just really missing altogether?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many. The one that I've kind of had a bee in my bonnet about recently is AI. Every LMS has got some crazy implementation of AI, which I thought was really interesting for the longest time, and got really excited about it. And then I spoke to someone who has a doctorate in the design of artificial intelligence. He just went, none of them know what they're talking about.
Right.
Because he's actually the guy that runs Peerage, David Kofu Wind, and he's a fascinating guy, he really is. But he kind of explained to me that what they've got is a bit like the Netflix system, where they've just got this big taxonomy of tags. And if I look at 3 courses about customer service, it might show me you might like another customer service course. So that's not artificial intelligence, it's basic tagging and tracking. Whereas an artificial intelligence might assess that, my job role, how long I've been in the business, and then suggest a more complex pattern of courses to me. Nowhere's doing that. So that's a key thing to look out for, because businesses get very excited about AI, VR, AR, and a lot of these technologies might technically be there, but are they usable to your business? I think that's one of those things, is that you're not usually the person being sold to. It's the senior leadership. It's right. Maybe not the finance team themselves, but whatever your sponsor within the business is. Your role, in my view, as a person in that learning environment, is sometimes to temper some of those pitches and say, well, actually, you're telling us all about this wonderful VR stuff. Our business doesn't use VR and has no current plans to in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So let's not have that conversation.
Yeah. And it would seem like if there were a particular vendor that is touting, that they, their system has AI capabilities, they would be kind of suspect, I would think. Like, there might be something to be like, well, I think, just attaching a chat bot or something to it.
Yeah, I think that's another really common sort of claim, is that, we've got a chatbot, therefore we're using AI. It's like, again, they are different technologies, and misbranding technologies from a technology company is concerning. The trouble is they all do it. So you can't, we can't quite say if they do it, don't use them, but certainly I would say don't be afraid of challenging things like that. And again, that's where your friend in IT might be really useful. Because a lot of IT people, as many of us will know, we are massive nerds, and so even if we have no real direct job involving AI, we follow that kind of thing. We like, because and it is really interesting technology, and I think it's one of those things where AI is going to play a huge role in L&D, but it's not ready. And the danger is, if we as IDs allow these platforms and salespeople to say to people, this is what AI in learning is, and it's completely useless at the moment or ineffective. When it does become good enough, people will say, no, we tried that, it doesn't work, we don't want it. And it's going to become so difficult to utilize great tools once they're ready, if we're pretending they're ready now and giving off very poor experiences because of it.
Awesome. There have been some really wonderful comments in the chat here that people are contributing, and I just want to read a couple things off that I think are particularly poignant. Q was saying, picking a new LMS is kind of like identifying what you want in your next relationship. You don't quite know what you want, but you know what you don't want, and I think that is a really important consideration. So what can you give me a quick rundown, or maybe not so quick, of the LMSs that you have interfaced with?
Yeah, so I spent quite a bit of time on Moodle and Docebo at the start of my career. I'm continuing to spend a lot of time with Moodle platforms because everyone has them. I've worked with SAP Learning Environment, for those that remember SAP Learning Environment 4. Woo! And then SuccessFactors and Cornerstone is where I've spent the vast majority of my time across those. What I have done is dealt with a lot of putting people in touch with. And that's where we get into the world of, I always forget their name. It's terrible. Their business is based like 20 minutes down the road. Calidus, the Calidus LMS, which is a really great platform. I've not had the pleasure of actually getting to use it yet, but quite often in what I do, I'll end up putting clients in touch with an LMS. So we'll have those initial conversations. We'll help them scope out their LMS storyboards, their kind of requirements list, and then say these are the LMSs that match up. Which is really great. Of those, I would say the one to, I always say Moodle is the platform to avoid. Moodle is the platform to use if you don't have another choice, in my opinion. So, if you need a free solution, Moodle's great. It really is. If you're in a very low budget situation, invest in an authoring tool and go with Moodle. It will work. I use Moodle for internal testing. You can spin up a localized Moodle server in 20 minutes on your desktop computer with practically, 10-year out-of-date hardware. It's fantastic for that kind of thing. It requires very little network or hardware overhead, but that comes at a big cost.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Like Hugh was saying, you don't quite know what you want, but you know what you don't want.
Yeah.
Can you offer some suggestions of what people shouldn't want?
So again, I don't think there's any global answer to that. Because every business is different. So for instance, Toshiba has lots of issues around very, very basic reporting standards. You don't get a lot of extra information, and you don't even really get to capitalize on the full extent of what SCORM can report, let alone XAPI or anything newer. I would consider that a massive limitation that would mean I wouldn't recommend it necessarily. However, how many businesses actually look at reporting? Honestly, really look at it beyond how many people have done the course and did they pass? Because usually that's what the business cares about. It's the learning people that want that next level. And therefore, whilst I would consider that a big no-no, that poor level of reporting, for other companies, it's absolutely not an issue. So it's very difficult to be absolute. For me, the big no-nos are actually all kind of technical in many ways, which is things like, does it offer single sign-on? Because that is, from a user perspective, from a simple user perspective, that is one of the biggest time savers around. I know everything in my office is single sign-on. Anything we consider buying, we go, will it connect up to our single sign-on system? Because I don't want to remember another password. That's one of the, and also as an admin, it'll cut down on the I've forgotten my login details emails that you'll get every single day otherwise. So for your sanity and for your users' sanity, and also it's really quick and basic. Microsoft have made it so easy to implement. It worries me from a technology company if they would say, no, we don't offer that. It's a very, very basic feature. Other than that, I think pretty much everything depends on your needs. It's a bit, it's a bit like saying, what's the best authoring tool? It's either personal preference and experience or the needs of the end user. If your network will run it and you can get it to look like how you want, it's the right LMS for you. Is it the right LMS for anyone else? No. And I think Moodle's, again, a great example of that. If you are in a situation where you do, and you're talking out of the box, you do not care what the user experience looks like, you do not care about branding, color schemes, or anything like that, upload Moodle, launch it in 10 minutes, set up your data in the background, away you go. It'll work. People will be able to launch courses, complete them. You'll be able to track the results. Higher education is a wonderful example of that. Their LMSs are, broadly speaking, not all of them, but I've seen a fair few, and they're usually terrible. But does that really matter to their end user? Is someone choosing a university level education based on the quality of the LMS? Unlikely. So therefore, is a university going to spend 30 grand a year on an LMS, or are they going to launch Moodle for free on their own servers? So what's good for one is going to be very, very bad for another. I would be shocked if I found a successful business running a Moodle based environment. Even just from an internal, data security point of view, Moodle has some issues. They're not terrible, but they're not great. So yeah, it's a difficult question. That I wouldn't want to give a blanket response to this is good or this is bad.
How about just a real quick biggest pet peeve? Like what is something that you just absolutely hate doing and you would avoid? Like if anybody were to ask you for advice on purchasing an LMS, just something that you just absolutely just hate having to deal with that is out there.
Oh yeah, any LMS that to do basic things, they're telling you, oh yeah, just create a custom code. I'm a strong believer that LMS administration should not involve HTML, CSS, or JavaScript at any point. The product should be able to do its job without all those things. That's the whole point in having an LMS versus just creating a website from scratch.
Right.
And for me, I have no real skill in any of those beyond some basic, I better look up how to do this. And whenever a platform, that you're being sold as a package, remember that, and they're charging quite a bit of sum of money for it. Whenever it's, just create some code. Nah.
Wow. No, I totally get that. And in fact, I don't remember who posted it in chat, but somebody mentioned that, like, for a fee, we can add this onto you or latch, whatever pieces of tech to your system.
Yeah, no, the fee was the huge amount of money we just gave you to take your LMS. It's the same with like tiered LMSs. LMSs are relatively complex, but they're not rocket science. Realistically, you shouldn't be paying an extra lump sum to turn on social interactions. You shouldn't be paying another lump sum to turn on another level of reporting. Either your platform is effective or it's not. You shouldn't be penalizing people based on how much or how little money they've got in terms of how effective your own product is. To me, that's just bad business.
Right.
Right. It's like me saying, oh yeah, you've got a quiz. You wanted that quiz to report. That'll be some more money. Yeah. That's how many customers would I have after year 2?
Oh man. Now, so we've got about 15 minutes left. I sort of want to get into this last piece about, and I know you talked about this in the beginning a bit, but why instructional designers should consider the platform as part of their design. I think that's something that we rarely talk about. And so I'd love to hear more about that from you.
Yeah. So I always put this in sort of real simple terms is whether think about your interests, whether it's IT, guitars, music, whatever it might be for you. I'm going to pick on mine. Very rarely do people only know the part they love. So, for instance, when I learned to play guitar, I got guitar lessons. From guitar lessons, I learned how to fix my guitar when it broke. From that, I learned how to upgrade it. From that, I learned got interested in how amps work and how to fix those, effects pedals. From there, I figured out that I was interested in recording audio. By the end, if it's a real interest for you, not only your piece, but the piece to either side of it, the things that allow you to turn, your love of playing guitar, let's say, into a recording or a great live sound or a combination of all those. And for me, it's the same with instructional design. We don't tend to just say, well, I do storyline. So I don't know anything about learning. I don't know anything about user experience. I don't know anything about graphic design. I just learn storyline. Well, no. The modern ID does all those things. We talk to SMEs, we develop soft skills, we learn to curate content, we learn graphic design skills and visual communication skills. We learn, I'm using Storyline as an example, but we learn our authoring tool. We learn all those things to create an amazing product because we know that by understanding every step along the way, like user experience, visual communication, graphic design, we can create a better end product. Then we package it, let's say in SCORM, and we effectively throw it at the wall and hope it sticks. Because by not understanding that LMS, by not considering it as part of our design, we're ignoring how the user is actually going to experience everything we've just done. Everything the user sees of your work is through the lens of the LMS. And that can come down to things as simple as responsiveness. Does your LMS open the content full screen, or does it put it on half a screen with a horrible grey menu down one side? Does it open it in a new window? And if so, is the device that user going to try and use it on block that window? It's a huge, huge piece of the learning experience design. That becomes even more compounded, if you will, when we start talking about the idea of campaign-based learning spread over more than one point, where you're expecting someone to come back over and over again over, maybe 3 to 4 months. This is the kind of situation where they simply won't come back if the experience isn't good. So then it doesn't matter how exciting that first page of your bit of content is. If no one ever gets to it, it's completely irrelevant. And I feel like there's no way that we as designers or developers or whatever job role you have, there's no way you'd surrender that kind of control over your product to any other part of your business, to anyone else. We're all used to having to have challenging conversations where we tell an SME, no, there is too much content here. We can't put all this into one course, or to a senior leadership team around how what they're suggesting is not an effective way to do it. And instead we need to do this. We trade on our expertise. And yet when it comes to the LMS, we seem very happy to say, not me, that's someone else's job. And I just feel like it's a real dropped ball for us, because if we could get that bit right, it would be a big step towards changing people's kind of impression of digital learning. Because I still say it's very rare that you tell people in a work setting you're going to be doing some e-learning and they're happy about it. And part of that is definitely badly designed e-learning, but part of it is also that disconnect between perhaps a fantastic piece of learning content that no one ever sees because the platform's really, really bad. So I think partially it's about stopping seeing it as an extension or part of the department or a role that you don't do. And it's about considering it the final step in your design process. Maybe, we're not hands-off once we've finished the course design. We're hands-off once there's reporting coming through and we see the impact it's had in the business. The LMS shouldn't be the extra little thing that helps us do what we do. It's a core part of how we deliver learning to end users. Because if your learning's not delivered, it's not learning. It's just pretty pictures and text. And I think
I love it. That's great stuff. It's this is just so important. I'm going to clip a bunch of that and just post it all over the place, because people really need to hear that. And it's, for as long as I've been doing this, I have never heard anyone say everything the user sees is through the lens of your LMS. And it's totally important. And there's some things that I'm seeing kind of tie around to that. Like with Eric saying earlier, build your LMS with the view of how it's going to scale up and organize appropriately. That's sort of integrated into how the instructional designer is that relationship between between the ID and the LMS. But then to Q's point here, unfortunately, many of these things only tend to come out once you get it in your hands and really stress test it.
For sure.
Yeah, like how do you really prepare for that? Or is there a way to even prepare for that? You can get the trial and just jump in there and do it. But I think that you have to just take what Eric is saying and just kind of scale appropriately and have all these things in mind.
Oh, for sure. And I think that there will always be that moment where you find something that your otherwise great platform can't do. And so I've yet to find a platform that can genuinely do everything really, really well. And that's not inherently an issue, because very few companies, as I said, need everything. They often think they do, but they don't. So I think the key thing is to do as much as you reasonably can. And then, LMSs, generally speaking, you renew them every year or every 2 to 3 years. So if you are running into issues, find out when you're next renewing and start looking. And don't be afraid to go to your business and say, look, this is the situation. From a learning perspective, this is the impact on the business. Because I feel like that's the other thing, is sometimes we get frustrations with the LMS, but actually they're just our frustrations. And as much as we are obviously all the center of our own universes, the important people are your users. Are your users experiencing an issue? Because those are the issues that will allow you to persuade a business to change a platform, because those are the issues that really have impact. You being frustrated with it is sometimes it's just us. We have high expectations of a product because we know we care about what we produce. So really focus on what's impacting the users rather than just what wouldn't be ideal, let's say.
Right. So how about this? What would be your dream LMS?
If I'm honest, my dream LMS would be incredibly simple. I would pretty much, this is where I get excited. Microsoft this year announced they're entering the LMS business. And my hope is that Microsoft will get this right, because if they're clever with it, they will pretty much say, here's Teams. It's also an LMS. There you go. Click here for your learning. Type in what you're looking for. You'll find it very quickly because we've got a really clear search setup. Everything can be linked to. It's all stored online. It's all just in straight HTML5. You can go to it from any device. It's fully responsive. Will that happen? No, of course it won't. But you asked what the dream would be. And if any company can do it, it'll be Microsoft, because they're not looking at this from the learning world perspective. They'll look at it, hopefully, as a computing business that says, why is everyone doing this so badly? It's a website where you host content. It's a glorified CMS, really. It's no different. We just have to have our own name for it because we're L&D, and that's what we do. I
love it. I love it. Thanks for that. I'm going to go ahead. Any last words here? We're coming up close to an hour here. Anything you want to wrap up with?
I guess the biggest thing is the LMS is simultaneously the biggest liability and opportunity for outreach in your business. It's the channel through which we get to communicate with learners directly. It's as much about it being a communication tool as it is a collation data reporting tool. So do use that. Use it to gather information from your users. Use it to push things out. Use it as a social tool within your business. Make it a core part of everyone's daily habit to go onto an LMS. And if in your business that's not possible, ask yourself why, who can change it, and then get involved. It's a huge learning curve to get involved in the LMS if you're not already. It's an even bigger one to try and persuade them to bring a new one in. But it's also one of the, since doing it once, I went, oh, this is not my job and I'm not particularly good at it, to actually, it's really good fun when you get into it. It's really interesting, and it gives you a completely different view of everything you'll go on to create. Even if you just fake implement one internally on your own computer to play around on it and consider the impact it has, do it. Use every free trial out there. Have an awareness. That way, when someone asks you, oh, have you ever looked at Lectora? Have you ever looked at Calidus? Have you ever looked at Cornerstone? You can go, oh yeah, I liked it because of this. I didn't like it because of that. Immediately, 9 times out of 10, you're now the expert in the room.
Nice. Something I neglected to mention earlier in the broadcast was you have the Ideas podcast.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's just wrap up with talking about a little bit about that, because I want to know how people can reach you.
Yeah, sure. So the Ideas podcast comes out every week, except last week when I missed it. It's the first time since I launched it that I missed an episode, but life happens. The idea behind the Ideas podcast is, the strapline is instructional designers drinking tea or discussing ideas and drinking tea. Super chilled out vibe, very similar to this, so people can just come on, have a bit of a chat, catch up, discuss their careers or a key topic they want to talk about. New episode goes out every Friday. Today, in fact, the one that launched today was with Ali York, who's just launched a company called York and Yours. She works in higher education, and we spoke about how to make more meaningful interactions in e-learning, especially around STEM students and subjects. But then we also blow that out to talk about how that impacts corporate as well. The show is for everyone. We've also launched a Discord community off the back of it. The idea being very similar to what you said at the start. You very rarely hear kind of real talk about these topics. Everything's very polished. Everything's very soundbite-esque. And everyone only ever produces perfect work, whereas in actual fact, we all know 95% of what we all produce, we think, oh, if I could just spend a bit more or spend more time, we all want to create better stuff. And I think it's better in the long run to say, yeah, that's maybe 85% of what it could be, rather than pretend it's 100% and artificially limit the industry.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I mean, I'm probably guilty of way too many times of releasing stuff way too early, but I just like to just hit record and go and say, have at it, world.
Well, yeah, but I think that's exactly the point. Is sending something out raw, to my mind, actually is far more valuable than holding on to it until it's perfect.
Yeah.
But then being willing to say that's raw, that's honest, it's not polished. I think that actually carries a lot more weight, especially within the community. By all means, let's show our really polished side to our clients and the people who's, ultimately whose money we want. Let's be honest. Yeah. But amongst ourselves, especially, let's be really honest. Let's cut straight to the, actually, I'm not particularly proud of this work. I think it could be a lot better, but that's what the client wants. And as much as I get angry whenever I have to hear it, some days the client is just right, because there's the deadline. They want it done. They've got to launch it. And that's what happens. But there's a fear around saying that kind of thing. But that's what the podcast is all about. It's about just having really chilled out, honest, unpolished conversations, and giving people a voice who otherwise maybe wouldn't have one. Yeah. I think in our industry, there are a few leading voices, which are all fantastic. I've got nothing against leading voices, but it's nice to hear from other people who are perhaps closer to the real world ground level of the industry.
That's my whole thing. I love it. And like Vanessa's saying, very true. Appreciate honesty and transparency. And I think that anybody that is kind of creating within this space, that's kind of, words of wisdom coming from Tom here. So important. Okay, well, that's it. I'm going to just wrap it up. Thank you so much for doing this, Tom. I know I'm going to be talking to you again. So interesting. You have so much wisdom to share. If you guys haven't already subscribed to his podcast, the Ideas Podcast, subscribe there. Where else can people find you, Tom?
I'm on LinkedIn. That's generally it's the best place to get hold of me, or obviously on the wonderful TLDC Slack group. That's a good place to grab me any time of the day or night, as you found out.
Yeah, you were always around. Even on LinkedIn, when I first started interacting with you, I'm like, wow, this guy, does he sleep or what is going on?
That's where business happens, right? You don't want to ignore a message. You never know which one is going to be Microsoft asking me to come on board and design their LMS for them. You never know. That's if you're listening, Bill, come on. It'll be a good combo.
That's awesome. I have some connections. I'll go ahead and forward them this episode. Right on, Tom. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. And we have another LMS episode coming up next week with Craig Seibert. He's going to be talking about Adobe Captivate Prime, and then also sort of what he does as an instructional designer within the LMS world, and more for this particular series are coming. And then I've got some other topics that I'm producing too. In fact, the creator discussion, I'm finding so many instructional design creators like Vanessa, like yourself, Tom, that has a podcast that I kind of want to have a discussion about that as well within this space. So look forward to that, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody. Thanks again, Tom.